This is Enneagram Invitations, saying yes to transformation. I'm Caryn Burley, a multi-certified Enneagram teacher, somatic facilitator, and transformationalist. Join me and other seasoned Enneagram students as we explore how the Enneagram invites us to wake up and transform, personally and collectively. We are delving into the highs, lows, and everything in between on the journey inward. Leave feeling inspired to recognize the invitations you're receiving, and, when the time is right, the courage to say yes. Here we go. I am so excited to be sharing this first interview on the Enneagram Invitations podcast. It was such a wonderful conversation with my very first Enneagram coach, Abi Robins. Abi is a certified Enneagram teacher through the Narrative Enneagram and a C-IAYT Yoga Therapist. They are the author of the Conscious Enneagram, How to Move from Typology to Transformation, host of the Conscious Construction podcast, and founder of Queer Enneagram. They've led in-person workshops across the country and at the Enneagram and Coffee Summit, the Shift Network's Enneagram Global Summit, and the International Enneagram Association's Global Conference. Abi's also got a great Substack that I have personally really been enjoying reading, and we'll make sure to link to in the show notes. Abi lives in Austin, Texas, and I recently got to visit them in person just a couple of months ago, which was such a treat. We got to catch up and hug, and oh my gosh, I just love when I get to connect with my Enneagram people in person. The conversation you're going to hear was recorded a little while back, but it's still so relevant, if not somehow more relevant, and it really feels like the perfect time to be getting it out there. So I'm excited for you to listen. But before that, you'll hear me raving in the episode about Abi's book, and it focuses on what they call the three-legged stool of what leads to real growth when it comes to something like the Enneagram. And those three legs are practice, lineage, and community. And in the last episode, I introduced some of my personal lineage and a little bit about finding my way to the Enneagram, but I didn't get into my lineages of where and how I've studied the Enneagram and the teachers I've learned from. And so I just wanted to take a moment to do that now and honor that and share that with you. So as you'll hear in my interview, Abi is part of my Enneagram lineage. They were my first Enneagram coach, the first professional Enneagram person I hired. And it wasn't too far into us working together that they helped me see that I was really ready to do real training in the Enneagram. And I decided to pursue my first high investment, formal, professional Enneagram training, which was with the Narrative Enneagram, which is definitely part of my lineage. So I feel so grateful that I got to do in-person training with them before the pandemic. I spent 6 days doing their first 2 intensives, and oh my gosh, it was life-changing. And really part of what set me on this path of getting more serious about working with the Enneagram. So the Narrative Enneagram, TNE, is one of the oldest public-facing Enneagram schools. It was co-founded in 1988 by Helen Palmer and Dr. David Daniels, and it was the first Enneagram school to be accredited by the IEA, the International Enneagram Association. And it uses panel-style interviews with skillful facilitation and compassionate witnessing of the audience. So that's where I completed my first professional Enneagram training, their Enneagram Professional Training Program. I got to facilitate panels on all 9 types and get feedback, and I continue to draw from this in my approach, especially in my group offerings, which if you're in real time listening to this, I have a group program coming up soon, and we're going to be using panel style work, so be sure to head to my website to learn more about that. But through TNE, I also met another influential mentor of mine. You probably will keep hearing me talk about her. Her name is Marion Gilbert. She was an adjunct faculty at the Narrative, and I was immediately drawn to her way of working with people somatically. In fact, I have a whole other podcast talking with Marion about her work. It's called the Somatic Enneagram Podcast. So I am certified with her as a somatic Enneagram facilitator and a mentor in that work, and it heavily informs the one-on-one work that I do in addition to how I facilitate panels. And then I am also trained and certified with Russ Hudson and Jessica Dibb through the Shift Network. I did a year-long training in the Enneagram and Conscious Living, where I got to learn so much from Russ and Jessica and our essence circles and made such wonderful connections through that. And they brought in a lot of different longtime teachers to help us really broaden our awareness of who's in the field and to appreciate and honor the wide variety and range of theories and approaches that different teachers have in the Enneagram world. So I got to be exposed to so many different ways of holding and working with the Enneagram. And I continued on after the year-long program to complete a teacher training certification with them, led by Russ and Jessica and Gail Scott, who has formally certified folks through the Enneagram Institute. So I want to honor that lineage as well. And with the Enneagram, there's so much evolving. There are so many new theories coming up all the time. It's not a static system. I have taken a lot of different classes, learned from so many teachers. I just wanted to highlight some of those primary places that I've studied and learned from, that I pull from as I'm transmitting teachings when I do. So thank you to Abi for highlighting in their book how important lineage is. It's so good to know where your teachings are coming from. So now we're going to get into the conversation with Abi. We will be going into their personal process, some really big ups and downs in the work, talking about how the Enneagram can really be a bait and switch sometimes, and how the real deal of the inner work is extremely vulnerable. I'm really touched by what and how Abi shared, especially from the perspective of a type 8. And honestly, I won't preface it anymore. I want to get into the part where you get to listen. So here we go. Yay, welcome, Abi. I'm so excited to have you. Thanks for being here.
I'm super excited to be here, obviously, because I'm talking over you. But yeah, I'm super stoked. I was very glad to get the invitation.
So Abi was my first Enneagram coach and one of my first teachers. And it's been a little while since we've connected. So it's really exciting to get to be with you in this way and like bring your voice forward more in my life. And then also sharing it with folks who have found me before they found you.
Yeah. I feel like there's probably a lot of people that have found you before they found me. I kind of feel like I've been in Enneagram hiding a little bit over the last few years, which is terrible timing considering I released a book a couple of years ago. And I put it out into the world. And then I was like, you know what? I'm gonna just disappear from social media, from all of the things. I've been slowly trying to make a comeback, but that's we'll see how that goes. But it's been super cool to see your stuff like kind of exploding. Like I'm very like proud Enneagram coach over here. So yeah, I'm stoked about it.
Honestly, so much of what I've learned from you is through example. And there was honestly the intimidation factor at first, because when I found you, it was probably 2019.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was into the Enneagram, but I would think your stuff allowed me as like my social work self.
Mhm.
And you were talking so much about intersectionality and bringing in all these voices. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm allowed to like be into the Enneagram because it actually does encompass these values that I carry. And I had been kind of skeptical at first. And you were having these great conversations and putting out your podcast and doing all this stuff on social media. And it was amazing. And I ultimately worked with you for like 2 years, I think.
Yeah.
And to watch you, create so much and have all this energy for it was amazing and also intimidating. And now to watch you, I don't know, maybe you're leaning into your 9 wing and hiding a little bit. I'm like, oh, good. That's also allowed.
Yeah. I I think it's hard for me. And we're just gonna get into 8 stuff right now because that's how this conversation is going. But like it's been really hard for me to accept that maybe my energy is not limitless and boundless.
Ugh.
Right, which like, any sane human being is like, "Well, no shit," but I'm like, as an 8, I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" Like, no, I'm supposed to maintain this level of energy and production at all times forever. That's definitely not how things have played out for me. I really appreciate that, like, you've seen kind of my I don't even know what to call it.
Your humanity.
Yeah, there you go. My humanity, my disappearance, so to speak, and find it inspiring in some way because it's been really, really painful and challenging for me. And so I appreciate that someone's getting some value from it because it's definitely it's very counter to the way I've always operated. It's taken me some time to kind of look back and reflect and get some perspective, but writing the book really took it out of me. And it's really been since then that it's just been like very hard to engage. And I've tried with like little things, but nothing really feels like it has the staying power, and I don't feel like I have the consistency or the discipline or the energy or the capacity that I used to. So, I mean, both my inner work and my like actual job work have changed quite a bit in the last couple years.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, thank you for letting me witness you and, letting folks witness you in this because why I'm starting this project mirrors this a little bit. I had this other podcast with a friend and somehow a ton of people listened to it, which is still kind of mind boggling. But, the Enneagram's so hot.
Yeah.
And I'm also feeling a little bit like I don't really want to just keep talking about the types
Yeah.
and about the Enneagram. And I get that people need that on ramp. I
Mhm.
needed it also. And I was like, wait a second, where's my enthusiasm? I want to talk to people who are actually doing this work and like willing to show what it's like to really be doing the work in an uncomfortable way
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
not in the like, look, here's my 2 sentence says about my transformation, or here's the tip that you can do and like suddenly get somewhere. And I think it's so helpful for me when my like teachers are when I get to take them off of the pedestal that my type has built for them, being like, oh my gosh, like you wrote a book and you like led this community and you've got all these, you know,
Yeah.
pieces of content and all of that. And to be like, right, there are ways that things come through people, and there's also ebbs and flows of life that are going to hit us differently.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you asked a really like powerful question in what you just said, and you asked, well, where's my enthusiasm? And I mean, I definitely like I relate so much to this feeling of like I'm done talking about the Enneagram. Like, I have nothing to say on social media. I have nothing, like there are some ideas and some, things mulling around, for a possible second book, but it's not about the system, right? It's about something so much deeper. And really, I have no enthusiasm for talking about the system, not in a yelling into the void sort of way that social media is. I don't get energy from that anymore. Like, that's not enjoyable for me. If you want to sit down and you want to have a conversation about it and you want to ask me questions, like, oh, yeah, like I'm super into that. I would love to be a resource. I love talking with my friends about it. And I love helping people with it. Like, if we're one on one and we're doing this, then yeah. And that's really where my work is centered. The place where my enthusiasm really sits is sitting with people one on one and getting into it, not so much getting into the system, but getting into their lives and through getting into their lives, finding the system. That's where this whole thing gets really fun and exciting again. And of course, the like business side of my brain is like, well, that's really inconvenient because when you were talking about this on social media, you were certainly getting a lot more new clients in. So, there's this like trade off. But yeah, I'm just like following that thread of enthusiasm and like where the energy is really flowing and moving. It's been in some ways really hard, but in other ways, it's been a lot more rewarding for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I hear you speaking to the inner work, right? Like the system is a disembodied thing. People are this really complex combination of traits and their type and their background and all of this. But really, when it's not embodied and it's not alive, I mean, here we are at 28 needing that aliveness in order to have enthusiasm, in order to find the juice. And I will say your book also doesn't do that. I mean, you have an appendix with like a few pieces of information, but it's so personal And it really does. I mean, I love your book, by the way. It's called How to Move from Typology to Transformation. And I think that's what we were still talking about, in these other ways are how do I actually be with this stuff and live it?
Yeah, exactly. Like, because I see so many people and so many people come knocking on my door, wanting to work with me. And they're like, oh yeah, I've studied the Enneagram for so long. And what that means to so many people, like to my surprise, is that they've been almost constantly reading a book about, like, there are so many books out there, mine included. And if you just read book after book after book after book, it doesn't serve you. And, I want to see people, like you said, really engage with this. Don't let it be a disembodied system. Like, if the system is disembodied, it's useless. It's absolutely pointless. There's no reason that you should know it. It's the most piece of trivia you could possibly waste your brain space with if you're not going to put it to work in your life.
Yes. And I mean, I'm like smiling over here because I mean, I read your book and I like to think that I'm invested in like doing the work, but I could feel even your book is about finding your inner practices, finding your guides and mentors, and finding your community to actually do the work with. And I could still feel my mind wanting to take that information and grab the new language that was brought and be like, oh, I could teach this better by like sharing these words again. And it's just so automatic. And I think so much of how I know I was taught in my systems of education, it's like, just like reference the source and maybe say one thing new and explain yourself well. And like, that's a
Yeah.
good job.
Yeah. And, I think you've really hit the nail on the head. Like, it's how we are enculturated to process information. It's so deeply head centered, right? It's like, it's literally in one ear, out the other, or in one ear and out your mouth, right? Like, there's no real integration. The complaint when you're in school is always like, well, when am I going to use this? Right? Like, because we're not teaching things from an embodied place. And like, I think every school of study is guilty of this to some extent, at least in Western culture, but like allowing information and quote unquote like data to be superior to experience. I believe in science and the scientific method. I'm not saying that like people's personal experience overrides data, but the data is only valuable when it can be lived. Otherwise, it's just another thing that's taking up space in your brain and it's not actively guiding the way that you live.
Yeah, I've been really trying to notice my bias against the head center lately because I think it gets used in such a distorted way. And then we think that's all that our minds are doing. And it got so demonized in kind of like some spiritual work and stuff. But when you said it's just taking up space, if it's not connecting to the other centers, basically, like my understanding of the head center through practice and this work is it's actually about spaciousness. It's about the ability to connect things and including the data, including the analysis part of our brain. But it only really works when there's some level of stillness and spaciousness so that those insights can come in. And if we're just kind of like cramming a ton of information in, which is how I feel when I'm on social media, or I will listen to podcasts at like 2 times speed and be like, I just need it in my brain. And it's like, oh, after a while, I'm like, well, I'm exhausted mentally and I can't apply any of this. There's too much.
It really reminds me, there was this phase in my life, it was what I like to call one of my slides to 5, where, shit in my life had hit the fan and I was really like living in my refuge energy at 5. And I think that year I had read something like 18 or 19 books. To be clear, like, I don't read fiction. I read nonfiction. This is like all I read. Like, we're talking 17, 18, like big, chunky nonfiction, here's how, like, here's science, here's how to live your life better, here's spirituality, here's psychology, all of these things, right? I just like dove in. And I had this sense that like this is changing the way I see everything and all of these things. And I definitely think it influenced me. But when I look back, I realized all of the problems and all of the shit of my life was still there. Like I hadn't actually changed the like manifestation of my life. It helped me see things differently, but I was taking in so much, I couldn't possibly digest and integrate all of it. I've felt a lot of like guilt and shame over the fact that I don't really read anymore. It I feel so like vulnerable just saying that right now. I'm like, oh my God, did I just say that on podcast? But the books that I have read, there's, I guess we could call it two and a half. I read this book called Breath by a guy whose name I don't remember. It was really good. It was about, breathing, all these things. And like reading that book changed my relationship to my breath and impacted my relationship with my breath in a tangible and practical way. The next book that I read was Where the Deer and the Antelope Play by Nick Offerman. For those who don't know, Nick Offerman is actually an incredible writer, very, very funny. And reading that book, it changed how I wanted to orient my life to nature and to the outdoors. Right. So it's like, I'm not reading as voraciously as I was, but it's like, instead of eating a ton of food that then I throw up later that I can't actually like keep down, I'm actually like taking things in that are changing me. And this pace is just so different than what I'm used to. Um, it's like there's this part of me that knows it's the right thing, but it's like a really hard pill to swallow. I mean, so I found the Enneagram, like, what I'm finding, through anecdotal experience with clients and friends. Like, I found the Enneagram and it really kind of took hold for me when my life was just a shit show. It was a total mess. It was ridiculous. Like, wow, I'm surprised any of my friends from that time still speak to me. But they do, because they're amazing and they're wonderful people. Um, and so, saying yes to like the transformation of the growth was kind of the only option, right? Like it was literally the only way out of where I was. And I desperately wanted to be out of where I was. Like I did not want my life to be this. And so the Enneagram kind of like laid this path of like, well, here's how you get out. But over the years, that has shifted pretty dramatically. We're coming up on like 10 years since I found the Enneagram and started working with it, which is pretty nuts. But in that time, it's shifted so much. The Enneagram was this like path out of this kind of wilderness that I found myself in. And I remember very distinctly the moment when I realized I was using the Enneagram and my like spiritual practices, like the type had come in and like distorted how I was using them. Like I remember the distinct moment when I was like, oh, I'm doing all this because I think that if I do, no one will be able to hurt me again. And that was a really big and painful moment for me, uh, to realize that on some level, in order to grow or even really in order to be present and fully alive in my own life, I had to allow myself to be hurt. And that started in these like small ways and has slowly grown um, into this acceptance of vulnerability. And by vulnerability, I mean ability to be impacted positively or negatively by the world around me. I have a lot of fear of becoming a hardened person. Um, and honestly, I mean, being queer, being a trans person, living where I live in Texas in this political moment, it's easy for me to see how it would happen. When your life is actively being threatened on a daily basis, it's easy to see why the armor is necessary, why the closing off is important. But it doesn't give you any room to really live. And I think right now for me, I feel really grateful that, this saying yes to the transformation has really been facilitating these like other opportunities that have come into my life through, mostly through cycling. And like I would say it's an analogy, but it's not an analogy because it's like actually happening in my life. But I can take what's happening in my life analogy of like moving from spending most of my time in a car, which is essentially this like massive chunk of metal, that's moving at a breakneck speed that isolates me from the rest of the world, that, is supposed to protect me and, all of these things, this little like armor pod that I shoot around town in or shoot across the country in. Moving from spending the majority of my time in a vehicle like that, in an automobile like that, whether it's a car or whatever, to most of my time on a bike, which is like so deeply exposed. And it's like you when you're riding down the street and some asshole close passes you and flips you the bird and tells you to get the fuck off the road. And yeah, you want to harden. You want to steel yourself against that. But because it feels safer, right? It feels like, oh, well, I'll just do that instead. And then I don't have to deal with this. But what I've found is that like being on the bike has, and like, I do a lot of like gravel riding and long distance, whatever. And like, that's wonderful. But there's something really particular cycling through my city and like running my errands on bikes and, like taking that as a mode of transportation, that this style of cycling has slowly been reopening me to the world. I can feel it again. And some of that is really hard and painful and doesn't feel good. And some of it is the most rewarding and enriching things that I've ever felt. But those things are only available because I'm so exposed.
Right. And there's so much I want to like underline that you just shared. But I'll start with where you've arrived now, which is this is what we call the unpopular proposition, right?
Yeah,
Is
exactly.
to actually feel pain or be in adverse experiences and choose to open anyway, not necessarily to the dangerous outside world, but to the inner experience of
Yeah.
how it is affecting us.
Yeah. Yeah. It, well, and I almost, I mean, I almost want to like, kind of erase that dichotomy of like opening to the outside world versus what's happening inside. Like
We use queer mind binary right now, Abby.
yeah, of course. That's what I'm here to do, right? Like I don't think that internally, if you haven't opened to the painful, dangerous outside world. And this idea that we can shut ourselves off from the painful, dangerous outside world is truly really, really privileged.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I think that this is a message that people who are interested in the Enneagram really need to hear, because they're mostly cis het white folks, upper middle class, or even upper class. We're talking about people who, have benefited greatly from capitalism and now don't have anything else to do with their time except go to Enneagram trainings and whatnot. Um, like no shade to those people until they deserve it. Um, but just like my journey with this tool, we can't stop with using this tool to reinforce our types. This tool and this system is designed to show us how to be more fully human. And that requires us to open to this scary, dangerous outside.
Yeah. And I mean, the non-duality of it, like the mirror of what we're facing inside is going to show up on the outside, and what we're facing on the outside is going to show up on the inside. And they both interact with each other so deeply. I think that's one of the things that this work has helped me see as someone who hasn't had a lot of conventional faith in my life before that, to be like,
Yeah.
whoa, this exact pattern that's going on inside me is now showing up in my relationships. And it's now I can see it in the politics of the world. And now, oh my gosh, I really understand to a deeper degree the microcosm of my organism and how it's interconnected with others and the whole world.
Yeah. And it's like we really are in this together. And I think that's maybe what's been most impactful for me in this process of opening myself, allowing myself to feel the world again. Like what I'm really feeling is people, right? Like on a bike, you can't ignore the unhoused person sitting on a corner, right? You're going to start up a conversation because they're right there. Like, you can't roll the window up. You can't, pretend to look at your phone. Like they're right there. They're in space with you. I was riding yesterday and I meandered through a neighborhood I don't always meander through, and there was a family out in their driveway selling lemonade with these three little kids who are probably 5. And I didn't have any cash, but they're like, "It's okay. We're mostly just giving it away anyway at this point. Nobody carries cash, so it's fine." But I got to have an interaction with this family, with this child handing me a lemonade, right? I would have never even gone through that neighborhood if I wasn't on my bike. Even if I had gone through that neighborhood in my truck, it would have been so easy just to blow past them.
Yeah.
Opening yourself to the world is what's connecting you to it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is speaking so much, and I can feel the softness as you're sharing. You're like, I don't want to harden. And it's interesting. I wonder, going back to what you shared before, because I think this is really common. People get hooked into the Enneagram space when they're struggling, and the type is usually what gets hooked. It's like, I could make this better. I could do something and fix something that I'm feeling. And it's just our way in, right? Wanting to get out of pain. And now you're describing the full circle of being like, actually, maybe it's okay to allow things in and be with it, right? But we don't get there for quite a while. And
Yeah.
and then I think we get hooked, and then we start kind of healing, quote unquote, or we're doing this work, but our type is really what's doing it. And I don't know, I'm just kind of naming this cycle that you've outlined really clearly that I think is so, so common. And I don't think we talk about the spirals of it enough, because especially in an introduction, it's like, this is your path out. This is the way to freedom.
Yes.
And someone who has been taught, you just learn it and then you're better, and here we'll cure it and then you can move on with your life. I certainly didn't realize when I started dipping my toe in that this was like a lifelong invitation. And even Jessica Dibb, one of my teachers, talks about what she calls the transparent veil, where even after you've been through iterations of kind of healing some of these pieces in you, we start to reach for the thing that our type wants. So my version of freedom as a 9 is to like be so open to the world and to be so soft and inclusive that I barely am even here and I just like blend into everyone else. Whereas, there's 9 different versions. And still at that level, we're like, that's lovely. Part of me does just think that that would be enough, right? And when we get there, it's like, no, there's always more. There's always more unfolding. Otherwise, like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
So I don't know what that,
I mean, so much. First of all, just to like give you like a peek in like behind the curtain for an 8, like even just you like acknowledging, like it's okay for me to say that I don't want to be hard, but coil I had when you named the softness in that, like even just saying the word, like I can feel it in the back of my throat, like my whole system's like, "Whoa, no." Um, but I can acknowledge that that is where I'm moving towards, and that's what I want. Um, and what I'm, feeling through this, like you said, the spirals of this is like there is some level where the Enneagram, it helps you like sort out your life. I think that's where people get hooked. There is kind of this like light at the end of the tunnel for a lot of people that's like you can improve your relationships, you can improve your work, you can, feel better about yourself. And I think that all of those things are true. Those you can get there through the Enneagram, right? You can get to this place where your life is so much better and blah 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 on this like outer level, right? You can get there. The thing is that feeling of kind of having this outer life put together is not sustainable unless you continue the work internally. And even sometimes it's not, right? But at that point, right, like there's kind of like this peeling off of like, okay, you got your outside life together enough to have the capacity to move inward. And then once you start moving inward, the outside stuff is the outside stuff. It's going to do what it's going to do. But when we stop at the outside, we've sold ourselves short. We've sold the system short. We've sold our community short.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the language that is coming up for me is like, we can sort out these things, but we still haven't woken up. And I heard recently a helpful distinction of like, in the Enneagram world, you hear about levels of development, but those are really levels of spiritual development. And we also have like very human developmental stages. And I think the like more practical side is dealing with those. Like, okay, how did your needs not get met? And like, what do we have to revisit and reparent and reconnect with? Which is crucial, like life changing.
Yeah. I don't want it to sound like I'm, and if you find yourself in that position or in that phase with this work, I don't want it to sound like that is unimportant, or not valuable, but it pales in comparison to what's next.
Right. It's the actual waking up and seeing the personality and how it's incessantly doing its striving and wanting its thing and struggling in its way. Like that is a whole other layer. And the example is coming to mind. My husband and I have been watching couples therapy on Showtime, which is great. It's great. You get to see couples like throughout some period of time in sessions, and they're having these breakthroughs and they're learning to communicate. And sometimes they're not. Like one couple like left, which I was like, this guy is such a 7 and it's fascinating. Like I was like, wow. But But we're watching it. And on the one hand, we're like, wow, I'm so glad we don't have this level of communication issue. Like we have the capacity to turn toward each other, and we've had to learn, right? We've grown. And then on the other hand, we're also pausing and having like huge things come up that are like, oh, this is the work right now. And I just like yesterday kind of put together that a lot of my stuff right now is around my self-preservation instinct and like not really knowing how to care for my body. And like
Yeah.
all of this stuff is coming up that I, took a few days to even, and a lot of help to like put words to this, even though I have this framing, because it's so deeply in there and I so don't want to see it because it's this version of my work right now. And so we can say like, yeah, I understand the high level pieces around compassion and presence and, some words that I can throw out that I've like quote unquote worked through. And then yet there's always these deeper layers. And I have to keep asking myself when you're saying like, where's the enthusiasm? Like, where is it for you right now? And I'm also having a hard time digging into what is it that I work with people on? Like, there's not a specific issue that I'm like, this thing has changed my life and I'm going to keep talking about it over and over specifically. But for me, I'm like, it's like about how do we actually wake up? How do I actually keep going and continually like meet the moment and let it change me over and over again so I don't get complacent, which my type wants to be, or like I don't just get comfortable enough. It's actually like having to commit to it over and over again. That feels really exhausting to my type. And yet when I actually manage, that shift, it's like so energizing and reconnecting. And it's just, I think what I'm mostly trying to say is these conversations are my bid for like, where are the people who are willing to like be on that long path? And how do I have more of these conversations? How do I remind myself again and again that it's worthwhile, that it's like possible, not to get to the end, but to keep going?
Yeah. Yeah. It's possible to keep going.
Yeah.
That feels really powerful. And I think that's why I talk so much about community in my book, that like there is something about feeling connected, and in some ways like doing life with people who are also doing this work, um who, like you said, are in it for the long journey, uh, because not and uh, I think I don't feel like I have developed thoughts on whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's just a thing. It's just a fact. Like not everyone who gets interested in the Enneagram is going to uh be willing to suffer.
And that gets to like, we have to give up the thing that got us in the first place, which was mostly our type. And then at a certain point, it's like, so that thing, the one thing that you wanted badly enough to do this work, you don't get to have that.
Nope. No, don't. You don't. You don't get to have it. But I feel like the that that process of letting go of that is, well, it comes in waves. Like it's slow. It's not all at once. Um, but the hope is that when the time comes, you do have the capacity to put it down. Like the process helps you to realize that you don't really want that thing and you never needed that thing.
Or you
But
already have that thing. And
well, I mean, I feel like it's not even that you already have it. It's just that like it's not necessary.
mm.
Like, that all of these things that we're striving for, in some regard are just made up. Like I look around the circle and I'm like, none of those things are real in any sort of like lasting way.
When you say those things, what are you?
I think about like what the hooks, right? Like to for an 8 to be invulnerable, right? To be strong, all of these things. Uh, a 9 to almost not exist, right? For a 1 to be so good and right and perfect. For a 2 to be this like endless well of love and support for other people. We can go around the circle, right? It's like none of those things are real.
That's so interesting because I was gonna ask you, like, what do you latch on to when that stuff is falling away? And but it's my perspective also is coming in to be like, yeah, the distortion of it isn't real, but like the essential quality, it's the reason it's not real that a 2 has to be like abundantly loving and giving all the time is because it's already flowing through. Like it's already here. They don't have to do anything. And it gives me a lot of comfort, and here's my type, right, being like and it also, though, I do find a lot of, uh there's something about the teaching that feels deeper to me, the non-dual, the holy ideas kind of teaching of, like, it's already here, there's nothing you could do to get more of it or less of it. There's nothing you could do to get
And
rid of it.
that's the distinction of what we're talking about right here is that we're not reaching for our holy ideas. We can't. What we're reaching for is this. uh, It's like a square peg for a round hole. We're reaching for something that doesn't actually fit, that doesn't actually even exist, right? Like it's impossible for 2s to be a boundless, well of love and support for other people because at some point they will run out, right? Like what they're striving for is not real. It's impossible for 8s to be impervious, to be unaffected. Like, of course we're affected. We're just not like we're just trying to like blind ourselves in search for this thing that is not possible. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But I think it's when we stop this, when we realize that like that's not real, that's an illusion, we can open ourselves to, this deeper essence, the thing that was actually calling to us in the first place.
Right. Yeah. And
What is here? This is it.
yeah. It's all right here. And for me, speaking of community, like the only way to learn to do any of that is like you mentioned, nines almost want to not exist. It's like I don't want to upset the balance or the thing, and yet being witnessed falling apart, like letting go
Mm.
of whatever fake thing I'm reaching for and having people be like, I literally still see you. You exist. And
Yeah.
I also saw you yesterday, and I also am gonna be thinking about you again in the future. I can't do that myself. I'm working on it in pieces, but I think there's always gonna be this
Yeah.
witnessing that allows me to let go of
Mhm.
like, well, why did I want that in the first place? Because I want relationship, because I want connection, because I want to feel at home in myself while I'm alone also. And I need reminders
Mhm. Mhm.
that I can let go of the thing I thought was going to get me those things and not only still exist, but actually like feel more here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's been so much of my experience is like, the 8s, we've talked a little bit about like this feeling of aliveness. And, we'll substitute for an adrenaline rush. And that can come in the form of like extreme sports or picking fights or, all the stupid bullshit that we do, and then it's this like overprotection to like protect this sense of aliveness that we have. But really what we're looking for is we want to feel human. And it's been my experience that like you only feel really truly human in connection with another human. And you can't be connected to someone and be impervious or be that guarded or be that hard, right? You have to lean into the softness, to the permeability. You have to allow another person to impact you. And that's really how you feel alive. You know, not this like over the top adrenaline, whatever, but it's quiet and it's gentle and it's simple. And you are just with another person or a lot of other people, just with them. And that is what I've found to be like both the work and the reward for the work. You know, if I allow myself to be here and to be with these people, then I am alive and I'm aware of my aliveness and my humanity in a way that's just not possible when I'm striving to be protected and to be guarded and to be hard. But it's not easy. It's really, I mean, and it's suffering. Like that's maybe the thing that I am learning most, like in this like point in my life right now, is that and I can't shake this thought like in the back of my head that like my work is to suffer. I don't mean that in like a weird masochistic way, but like my work is to feel the suffering of the world, and like my own suffering included. Like my job is to feel and to remove all of the things that I've built to keep me from feeling all of this. The fear, the pain, the doubt, the confusion, the heartache, grief. And then I can also feel the joy and the connectedness and like they're not separate. They're all in there together. And I think that I always tell my clients that, like that's kind of the hard sell of the Enneagram, right? Is that like you don't get one without the other. Like you come on this journey and you think it was one thing, and then it's definitely a bait and switch situation, and you are definitely not going to get what you thought you were going to get, and instead you're going to get this thing that from the outside looks pretty shitty. But it's like it's really not.
Well, because from the inside, it's like the only way you build the capacity to be with the suffering is by building that compassionate presence that is able to
Yeah.
be with the suffering, like from the inside. So, yes, we get it in pieces from the outside, from our coach, our guides, or our community. And then we build that capacity to be like, oh, I actually get to be with my own suffering. And it
Yeah.
is healing just to be with it.
You know, this idea of like being with my own suffering, it really has been what has helped me to be more motivated to be in solidarity with others. And I, you know, it's like everything is spiritual and everything is political, but like being queer and being trans and really allowing myself to feel the fear of this moment and the powerlessness of my situation, allowing myself to sit with that, and like not immediately jump into action, which is what I used to do. That is definitely that has been my MO for most of my life. But to actually sit with it and really feel it, it's really allowed me to be connected to people who legitimately experience more suffering than I do. I can talk about how much, how much fear I live with on a daily basis, being queer, being trans, living in Texas. And I also know that the color of my skin provides me so much safety. And because I've been in touch with the fear that I have with my situation, I feel so much more connected to those who are people that don't have the privileges that I have. And I want to be connected with them, to sit with them in their pain, in their suffering, in their fear. And I want us to be able to exist in a space where we don't have that. But that's not where we are right now. Yeah, that's not what's happening.
That's not what's happening. And the work of yours, how do we be with what is happening?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's that desire to not be where we are right now. That makes something really interesting, and actually it colors our current experience, right? And so it's like, yeah, I don't want us to be suffering, but if we are suffering, I want us to suffer together. And there's something powerful in that. And I don't think that this is necessarily like effective political action, but I do really feel like my job right now and my work is to feel as much as I can. And my type definitely wants to jump into action. Like, it wants to do. And I don't know what to do. But I do know that right now, like, my work is calling me to feel. And I can't, there is no part of my system that can justify just feeling. And so there is always this, like, in the back of my head, like, well, you're not doing anything. And so, like, wrestling with that, it seems so clear and so obvious that, like, okay, right now I have to feel, but this drive to do is so, it's not just strong. It's like, it feels like there's a part of it that's almost like it's trying to invalidate the process of feeling in order to get me to start doing again.
Right.
And, like, that's the wrestling that I'm at, like, in my work in this, like, season of my life. It's like, how do I calm that enough to allow my heart to open and feel?
And what I'm wanting to say, I guess, is like, it takes so much self-trust to be able to recognize when that type-driven response is showing up, and when, because I imagine and I've experienced in true presence, when all three centers are online, from the present moment, there can be a clarity about, this is now the thing that I will do as an action.
Mm.
And it's clear, it comes in clearly.
Yeah.
And there's a distinction between that and this drive of, like, no, don't feel, just do.
Exactly.
Which is not including all three centers, right?
Yeah.
But I imagine it can feel so strong, and from a type 8 perspective, that can really mix up that impulse with clarity. There's a way that you experience it, like, what's the difference?
Oh my God, that is the question, I think, for eights. Like, how do you differentiate between impulse and clarity? Because, God, impulse seems clear. It is driving, it is decisive, it is like, yeah. And, I look back on my life and I'm like, yeah, that got me a real long ways. Like, that impulse, that drive, that has allowed me to do so much. but it's not clarity, because it's not informed by the heart, right? It's oblivious to the heart. And I think that that's why my work feels so clear to me now, that like I need to feel, because, the situation that we find ourselves in, like it feels dire. We need large sweeping change. It feels like our country is in peril, the planet is on fire, like the stakes are high. And my type is like, the stakes are high. We need to go. We need to do. But I know that anything I try to do from that place, I know at this point, I know the cycle well enough to know that it doesn't have the impact that I want it to have. It's not lasting. It's often very misguided. It causes more problems than it solves. And, with my type, I've definitely just, that I just manage the problem. I just do the next thing. But feeling the depth of where we are, I know that I can't move forward without being informed by the heart, by my heart, by the world's heart. And so far, the actions that I have clarity around doing, they're like frustratingly small. And like my type definitely thinks they're like super stupid. Like, what, you're not doing anything. Like you might as well not be doing anything. Like that's the feeling sometimes. It's like, but I know that right now, riding my bike instead of driving my car, okay, that's super small. But you know what? Like it's having a super positive impact on my life. Seeking out and supporting the process of engaging with joy for myself and for my community. Like, oh man, you can't put a number on that. You can't like quantify, you can't justify joy. But I know that that's what's mine to do right now. And man, it's like all this shit that I thought I would be doing with this like boundless 8 energy. It's like, nope, sorry. Like, you want to go and like protest at the Capitol or testify in front of the legislature? Like, there's nothing wrong with those things. But for me right now, that's not what's mine to do. And
You have done those things.
yeah,
I mean, I'm really like you're pointing, and I'm feeling it from my own experience as well. You've tried to do all the things that the type wants to do, and there's a point at which there's this surrender to like, that's not it.
And I think it's also important to say that like this is coming from me and my 8 perspective, right? Because if there's a 9 listening, it might be your job to show up at the protest and to scream into a megaphone. It might be your job to testify in front of the legislature. It might be your job to really make waves. And that might be a full 3-centered, embodied, clear, direct thing for you to do. That might be yours to do. That might be your right action. But it's not my right action. And man, that's hard to let go of. That's hard to give up. I like seeing myself as a person who does those things. I like seeing myself as someone who takes big, bold, decisive actions and makes big impacts. And if I want to grow, I can't be that person.
Well, there's a way that when you were doing that from the type, you were actually minimizing so much of you and your experience and your heart. I mean, we talk about the body triad as the self-forgetting triad. And even though aides look like they've not forgotten themselves,
We have.
it goes to everyone else, and it goes to the whole world and the country and like all of it. It gets so big that it's like, oh, where is my heart right now?
Yeah, no clue. No clue, because you've forgotten yourself. And I think eights forget themselves in a big way. Again, it doesn't look like the way nines forget themselves or the way ones forget themselves, but it's like it's hard to remember that I'm a person. Like it's so much easier to uh substitute, right? This is what classic like eight is like. If you feel vulnerable in some way, you in some ways project that onto someone else, and then you protect them instead, right? So like you couldn't protect yourself, so you will protect someone else. When really you just need to feel back into yourself.
And I heard that with when you're saying part of your job is to suffer like with the whole world. Like what I hear is when you are really with your own suffering, you then forge this connection that goes toward people who are also suffering, which is all of us in various ways on various scales. And to be like, wait a second, what is mine? To hold actually allows us to be like, oh, of course there's room for each person's individual suffering, including the folks who are suffering the most intensely. And going all the way out, hopefully we can do the spectrum of folks who aren't suffering in those ways, but they are still running their pattern and therefore are still running away from their own suffering.
Yeah, still sleep. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I just like deeply, I mean, just first of all, because I care about you as a human, I'm just honored and grateful to sit with you as you are like verbally exploring some of these things. And I'm sure you've been doing this in a lot of spaces.
Yeah.
But to share it, and like it's such an honor, and it really leads me to kind of how I like to close out, which is seeing each of us or seeing you as you do your work as a living invitation,
Mm.
an embodied invitation to this grounded sense of strength in your vulnerability, in the struggle and the suffering, in the amount of life that is inside of the softness that you're leaning into, and this sense of like the only way to get to the truth of the moment is to be fully in this moment. And that is kind of the innocence of the eight that they turn to as a virtue of like, all we have is right here. And what if I just am fully with myself right here in this moment, exactly as it is?
Yeah.
So thank you for your service. Whether you feel like you're hiding, you're walking the path is the service, I feel. And it's amazing. So thank you.
Thank you, Caryn. Thank you so much for having me and for having these conversations, not just with me, but for other people. I feel very strongly that like this will be what you're looking for, right? And that like, how do you, can these will be a beacon to other people who are trying to do this work. And, and maybe even fingers crossed, an invitation for people who haven't done it. And, maybe they'll get tricked into it like we all did.
My hope is that we can all just take it up a notch, because as you're naming this moment in time, it feels so poignant and important to absolutely do the work of making the changes and continuing to do the work and inviting more of us to do the work of being more with ourselves so that we can get that clarity of what that action can look like in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again so much, Caryn. This was wonderful.
Thanks so much, Abby. Any last words?
I think I'm worded out. People can follow me on Instagram, even though I don't hardly ever post anything. May come back, it may not. I have a YouTube channel that I've actually found more interest in posting things there, like podcast sort of things and whatnot, so people can find me. That it's Conscious Enneagram everywhere. And if you want to read a book, you can read my book. But this now, I'm just like, you can do this or not. It's whatever. That's
Perfect. I love it. I mean, honestly, I think if folks hear your voice here, your voice comes through so clearly in the book, and it's so personal. And it was really awesome to know you and then to read your writing, because I was just like, wow, yeah, this is Abi. Like, this is very cool. And also what you have to say is really effective and stimulating in all three centers.
Thank you.
You are teaching too. Like, your YouTube channel is great. I've been sending people some of your videos just as resource. So it's so interesting to feel like you're not having the impact your type wants to have when, like, I see it rippling.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate that. I was talking with someone who was like, "Oh, you're doing so much," and blah blah blah. And I'm just like, I don't feel like I'm doing anything. And I'm learning to like recalibrate the type. It definitely thinks that I'm not doing nearly enough, but everyone else seems to think that I'm doing just fine. So I'm trying to like, okay, calm it down.
You find the truth in both internal and external.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to Enneagram Invitations. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, or share with a friend. And if you haven't yet, subscribe on Substack to get new episodes and show notes straight to your inbox. And you can join the conversation in the comments over there. That's karenburley.substack.com/podcast. Want to go even deeper? Paid subscribers are invited to intimate discussion spaces facilitated by me, where we keep exploring these invitations together. If you're in the process of saying yes to your own transformation, I'd love to see you there.